Okay, there you go. So once again, thank you everybody kind of, for coming. And like I mentioned kind of before, we've been doing this series of events for around about 4 months now. And it all started kind of in the beginning of the pandemic. Really wanted to create a space for leaders to come and discuss kind of what they're doing well, what they're not doing so well, and also kind of learning from one another, because this is, as far as I'm concerned, really new to everyone. If it's not, I don't know if we should report you, or we'll have a separate conversation. And something that we have been using as a framework is called the 3 Rs. And the first R was respond, renew, and what's the last one?
Reset, and renew.
Oh man, I always get this wrong. Respond, reset, and renew.
You're the one who came up with it.
Well, I think someone who is much smarter than I am and get paid way more than I do came up with it. So I'm going to give whoever that person is the credit. So we've gone through the respond phase where everybody's like kind of either panicking of like, okay, this is happening. What are we going to do? And a lot of us here are kind of either business owners or influencers kind of within an organization. And we've gone through that phase. Some of us kind of saw this as an opportunity, kind of start jumping in, kind of doing stuff like this, stretching ourselves even more, kind of learning new skills. So we've gone through that kind of crazy phase, and now a lot of us kind of coming out of it. It's like, I need to kind of readjust a little bit, because it's very exhausting and tiring. And as the dust settles, before we go look for new opportunities and throw ourselves into the next thing, we decided to pivot into this new series called Future Look, to really help us slow down and reset. And really our goal at the end of the day is to help leaders kind of like ourselves ask better questions. And this is also one of the reasons why we have kind of each time we do this, every other week, we have a panel with different perspectives coming to talk about a single topic. And I would highly encourage you, even if the topics in the future may not be exactly kind of the industry that you're in, to come join us, because there's a lot that I have been learning kind of from all the speakers and the participants, in terms of kind of their perspective that they bring, how it helps me ask better questions in the work that I do. So kind of with that said, I want to introduce Mike Valdez, who works with me at Giant Shoulders, and I haven't even mentioned that that's kind of what that's the company that I started. That's what that is primarily kind of the sponsor kind of behind the event. So we are a brand strategy and design company, and we specifically kind of work with leaders to help them clarify their vision, so that they can better lead their team. So a lot of what we do that is similar to what we want to do here is to help kind of leaders ask better questions, and to do that is to kind of get different perspectives to make sure that you're not just living in your own bubble and think that you're the smartest guy in the room. So with that said, I want to hand off to kind of Mike Valdez, who is part of our team, and I'll let him kind of introduce the speakers and also kind of what they are up to, and also introduce the nonprofit that we are donating our proceeds to this week. Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Tina, and thanks again for everyone who's coming on the call. I'm really going to start just by introducing our guest panelists, and I'll just go in the order that I can see on my screen. And first is Dr. Shauna Springer, who's a leading psychologist in the nation in the area of being an expert on trauma, particularly in military transition. She's also the chief psychologist of the Stell Center, who works with trauma victims. She's a regular contributor to Psychology Today, and she's the author of a book called Warrior: How to Support Those Who Protect Us. And she's affectionately known as Doc Springer in the military community. And she brought to our attention the nonprofit that the proceeds of this event will come to, and I'll let her explain some of that in a moment. Our next panelist is Karriem Kanston, who's an independent certified coach, teacher, trainer, speaker through the John Maxwell team. And so he is a serial encourager who is a proponent of servant leadership principles, and he works with business owners and leaders to just help them develop the way they lead and the values they lead with, and especially focusing on small business leadership. And then we also have Andrew Pelletier, who's a wealth management advisor working out of New York City. And he's helped, since 2011, helped lots of clients find their way to financial freedom through creating custom plans for ongoing personal wealth management, investments, risk mitigation, and all the pieces in between. And so these three different people with kind of different areas of expertise are going to help us speak to the different kinds of personal effects that have come through all of the crazy impacts of COVID, specifically the COVID economy. So I just want to start, before we go any further, to actually turn back to Dr. Springer. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your work and about that nonprofit?
Well, thank you, Mike and Tino and Andrew and Karriem. It's not lost on me that you're sharing your expertise, which has so much value to benefit those who fight to protect us. And COVID-19 has had a dramatic impact on all of us. In fact, it means something to me when I speak to warriors of any generation and they say, I've been through a lot, but I've never seen society come to a standstill like this, or the impact of trauma in our country be this way, where people are so deeply and personally impacted on so many layers, and they're feeling traumas that military veterans have experienced for many years. So it's very meaningful. First, I'm hearing of it that we're going to do this for the nonprofit that I suggested. It's called Erase PTSD Now. And my work at Stella Center is fusing biological treatments with psychological treatments, because I've really seen this as a game changer. Treatments that have been advanced in special forces units, we offer those in combination with really high quality aftercare. And I've co-treated about 50 combat warfighters, and many people have been suffering from traumas due to sexual assault, robberies, all kinds of situations. So that's what we're supporting today. I'll get none of that, which is appropriate. I'm happy to have it go to those who protect us and those who are suffering trauma. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Dr. Springer. And so I want to kind of open up with a pretty general question. Looking over the last, I think it's 4 months now that we've really responded in the United States to the pandemic. How have each of you three responded to, if we go back to those 3 R's, just starting with respond, how have you responded? Like, what have your thoughts been, your actions of response, and even your emotions, both in regards to your personal lives and your professional field of work, to what's been going on in the pandemic? And maybe since we just started with Shauna, we can go to Karriem and Andrew and then loop back around.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So thank you all very much. So I have a question for everyone, and you could put your answer in the chat section. What is your level of change? Is it low, medium, or high? What is your comfortability with the level of change? Is it low, medium, or high? And you can put that in the chat section. And so the reason why I asked that question is that when you look at a crisis, John Maxwell says a crisis is an intense time of difficulty. And if you think about that, when crisis happens, there's a personality style called this personality style that they said 70% people are looking for safety in the world. And so if you just think about that number, that the majority of people in the world are looking for a safe place, how can we as leaders and people help other people and ourselves to be in a safe place when crisis happens? And so as many people have experienced crisis with COVID-19, crisis with the shutdown of the economy has impacted a lot of people. And depending on who you are and what you experience, that level of, impact tends to, happen to people very differently. And so one of the things I want to leave with people, a big word today, is be empathetic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that intro to kind of set us all in interactive right off the bat. And so,
You're
Kareem, I'm
welcome.
curious, in terms of your response and your comfortability, how has your life changed? How have you responded to everything that's been going on? Mentally, emotionally, professionally. What has your experience been?
So right before COVID, I experienced a personal crisis before COVID. So when COVID happened, I was already in the planning mode, crisis mode of how do you deal with a stressful crisis at the same time taking care of your family, your business, and all of the responsibilities and your children. And so when COVID happened, I already was in a crisis mindset, right? I just was coming out of a crisis. And when this happened, it helped me prepare to say, listen, yes, things are tough. You just went through a crisis. So how do you deal with it now, but then also help people, right? And so, crisis is common. People go through crisis every day. Now, depending on how they deal with that, depends on who the person is and what type of crisis they could deal with. And so, I would say, I was already in the mode and in a mindset, and the goal was for me during COVID is to help more people.
Very cool. Awesome. Andrew, how about you? And also, please, as I go along, any of you guys who want to add anything to the introductions I already gave, please feel free to give any background. So, Andrew, how about yourself? How has your response been, your experience been of all of this, in both, personally and professionally?
Yeah, so great question. First, I want to say welcome, everyone. Thanks so much, Mike, Tina, for putting this together. Incredibly happy to be part of this conversation, as I think it's an important one. And it's one that many aren't really having at this point, I don't think. So as it pertains to the question, it's funny when you ask her, right? I think often about my sister-in-law, who's a medic. She's actually a trauma surgeon out in Sweden. It was an interesting conversation itself right now. But she often refers to her field in the work and in the field. And what she says is she has simplified it to SABC, which stands for in the medical world, airway, breathing, and circulation. And it made me really reflect on what are my three, what are my top five, what are my clients looking at? And I slimmed it down to savings, debt, protecting, investing, and retiring. And having those five be the core focuses for every conversation that I have with all of my clients at this point, and drilling back down to the basics. As again, what I feel as though during this type of environment, it triggers an emotional response. And that emotional response can best be dealt if you have your five objectives or focuses in front of you. And if you really break it down to the fundamentals. And I always start all of my conversations and have in these critical times with around savings. And savings, because if you look at the American workforce, so many people have either transitioned or lost their job during the past 3 months. And it's been critical to go back and look at how they're going to survive as it pertains to an emergency fund or any type of savings.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Shauna, how about you? I mean, you already gave a little bit more of an intro of what you do, but
Yeah.
how is your response? Or even if we can start to bleed into the next question a little bit of like, how have you responded? And also like, what is the lay of the land that you're seeing if you look across the United States, if you look across your network and the people you're working with, what are the trends of things you're seeing as people respond to this?
Yeah, I'll tell you, the two emotions that were most dominant for me during the first phase of this were gratitude and shame. So the gratitude, because when this happened, all of a sudden the work I'd been doing for 20 years in terms of trauma and 10 years in the trenches with mental warfare became suddenly relevant. And I was getting all of these opportunities to do projects that were high impact projects all of a sudden, where I could use everything I had worked on and take it to the level of, this is a war against an invisible enemy. Here's how our ICU doctors and nurses are being impacted. Here's the enemy we face. Here's kind of like the PsyOps understanding of this kind of mental warfare. And one of the things I learned out of that was, I was grateful because I had a focus, and I've been busier than I've ever been in my career. And I realized that it's harder to do nothing than to do something really hard. So I think the impact of this personally for me was probably less than for people who have had to kind of sit at home and wait for bad news or had been laid off from their jobs. So I felt some measure of gratitude and guilt, with that, as well as the shame that comes from, because it just doesn't work to be a working mom that works 80 plus hours and school just stops suddenly and you have no childcare. I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. I felt like it just changed like my whole perspective as a parent, because they would send assignments, my 6-year-old would cross them out and like submit fart videos back to her teachers, and I was like so ashamed. Like, they see that I'm not able to cover my kids right now, like because I can't. So they're doing what they're doing. And for the first time in my life, I was like, I don't care about what the standard is. Like, I emailed their teachers and said, let's get practical. What is the minimum you need from us to keep us out of the doghouse right now? So I think just kind of seeing how trauma, it changes personality, it changes our situation, and trying to extend grace to myself and feel grateful for the opportunities I have and really make the most of those opportunities so I can use that expertise, to help other people. And so kind of to blend into your next question, and I'll turn it over to some of my fellow panelists, anxiety exists in proportion to what we don't know. And so I think about this in 2 phases. There's I was a runner in high school. So there are different muscles that you would use for a sprint as opposed to a cross-country race, different functions, right? And so in the short term, a lot of us were like, okay, what do I do? How do I provide for my family? Where do I get toilet paper? All of these near-term concerns were different than the concerns we now have about, is this going to end anytime in the next year? And many of us, including myself, have hit a wall with that and have had to scale that wall or work on climbing that wall. I'm still in that process, but learned a lot about how anxiety operates when we don't know the end of something that we're facing, a challenge. So that's one of the things I've learned among many, but I want to turn it over to my fellow panelists, so I share the time here.
Yeah, either of you guys can pick it up. I'd love to even shift to a kind of a conversational pattern here, and just feel free to go in and out as you're thinking of stuff.
Yeah. And
so I often think of
go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah,
no, go ahead, Andrew.
So I often think of behavioral finance in times of this nature, and I really have broken it. I mean, I haven't, but others have broken it down. And they enlist emotional reaction is one part of it. Another part is heuristic simplification, social influence, right? And I try to often think about what are the clients experiencing? How are people adapting to this? And how can I give them a runway to ensure that they reach their targets, right? And everyone's target's different, whether it's protecting their home or maintaining sex work. And to piggyback onto what Shauna said earlier, it's incredibly hard to navigate this environment where you don't know where the end game is and you are fighting that invisible, right, enemy here. So I've talked to the clients and I've had them maintain control, right? These are my 4 bullet points: maintain control, keep and build momentum, strike a balance with financial goals, and keep your eye on the end game. And when we talk about each one of the earlier 5 segments and focuses that I mentioned, I have them look specifically at this and say, how do we keep that momentum going in a time where it's so easy to get distracted?
Wow, awesome, Andrew. That was that was really good. It was reminding me of a client that I was working with, the entire team that provides affordable housing to people. And of course, because it was shut down, we couldn't do the training in person, and we stopped the training for the team. And I reached out to the executive director and I just say, hey, how's it going? Just want to check up on you. And she said I was the only one that actually called the first week that they were shut down to see how she was doing and her team was doing. And what that said to me is that how many people are going through the same thing where they don't have, they're not thinking, because everybody's trying to get things done and no one has checked on somebody else. So, that the first couple of times we were shut down, the weeks, people didn't know who to call, who to turn to. And I think it was so important for people to have a contact or a relationship. And so I would say even now, that's the same thing I think that, we should be doing as people, but also customers, right? We might think that a customer might not want to talk to us, but wouldn't it be interesting if you called them and say, listen, I just want to say hello? So that person that we couldn't do the training decided to pivot and have me as their outside crisis person, right? That they could call, and if they need some help, then I could be a person that could listen to them to get them through the next couple of weeks and months, and hopefully years to make that organization survive.
I think that is such an important point, Karriem. So what anxiety tends to do to us naturally is create tunnel vision. And people don't intend to become self-focused. It's not a moral thing. It's just that when you're in that state of primal panic, we all tend to biologically sort of focus and try to focus on survival. And sometimes our adrenaline is affected and we are in like a chronic state of fight or flight. What I call in my work, chronic threat response, is something that CEOs often feel before the pandemic, and many leaders are especially steeped in that chronic threat response right now. But what that does is it really makes us rather self-focused. And so one of the things I did in the first couple weeks was it's really cool. It was a virtual town hall for Congressman Scott Perry. We talked to his constituency. And one of the things we talked about was looking out for people that are especially isolated right now. To take us out of that mindset, here's a really practical tip. To take you out of the mindset of being sort of self-focused on survival, which is a state of primal panic for many of us. Who is it that you can think of in your life that you haven't spoken to since the pandemic started, who's likely to be especially isolated? And what would it do for you and them psychologically to put a reminder in your phone and call them and hear how they're doing since the start of the pandemic? It's an opportunity for us here as people that are in customer service or in business relations to do the thing that nobody else is doing and swim upstream and look beyond our own immediate survival and reach out to that customer, because it speaks to, for them, wow, that is a person who goes beyond themselves. I did a podcast for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast the other day, and the podcast host, Dove Barron, he made a really interesting point about we were talking about how this is not going to be 5 years long. No matter what, this pandemic, scientists are going to get to a vaccine maybe in a year, maybe 2 years, but in 5 years, we have to kind of think back, how would I like to look back on how I responded now? And will I be proud of how I responded? Will I be a good leader to my children, to the employees I support, to those people in my life? And he said something that was really interesting. He said, ask yourself, am I behaving like the virus? In a way that is so brutal that when I look back on this time in my life, I'm going to be ashamed of how I behaved. And so a really practical way to kind of put that insight into action is to think about somebody in your life who's a wise guide, a mentor, somebody you trust, and think about how they would manage themselves, how they would hold their center through crisis, and then pattern some of your own choices on that. Because eventually we will come out of this, and it is going to shape our character and the character of those that we lead. So just a couple of practical ideas to kind of play off of your point, Karriem.
Shauna, did you hack into my computer and read all my notes on questions to ask you? Because you keep answering them before I say anything.
No, I didn't.
That stuff is so good. That's trying to wish I had a better way to take notes while I'm hosting.
Hey, it was the good prep, Mike, that you prepped us already. So
yeah, I mean, you guys are great. So yeah, I'll kick kind of the question that you already answered to the other two of like, what are some ways that we might tend to respond either in a healthy way or an unhealthy way, right? Because I can imagine, I mean, you already talked, Shauna, about the kind of that anxiety response, right? And how like that's a primal thing and it's not automatically a bad thing, but if we stay there, then it is a bad thing. And so I'm wondering what ways, again, personally or in the context of business and leadership and finance, what are the ways that we respond, or what are the ways that we react that might be unhealthy as opposed to some healthy ways that we can respond?
Yeah, so I'll take that one for real quick here. So I think two of the talking points that I've had a lot lately is around staying invested, and understanding that recoveries such as the one we experienced in '01 as well as '07, they take time. Both of those took 48 months to recover financially when looking at the in stock market. That being said, if you look at where we are now, I mean, the S&P is well up. The NASDAQ is well up. They've recovered pretty well, right? The Dow Jones is lagging. But what's interesting is that you look at heuristic simplification, and there's a lot of times people say, well, you should stay in the market. And while that is true, it's often important to look at rebalancing and what your asset allocation looks like. And so many people get stuck inside of that mindset of, well, I should just stay in the market, that they don't actively take the approach of looking at where they are in the market and how they might be able to better position themselves. And I take that financial lesson and I plug that also into my life. And I ask myself, my wife is actually a surgeon here in New York City, and she's been asked to pick up extra shifts. And so our whole life has been about rebalancing and trying to reach our strengths as well as keep a harmony inside of our family as we have a little girl. And it's involved the utilization of a lot of different people, friends, family, everything to keep us both at work, so we can in turn help the people that need us most during this time.
So I have a question for everyone. If you could put your answer in the chat, as you know, I like participation. What is comfortable for you, listening or talking? What's comfortable for you, listening or talking? Which one is the number one thing that you're comfortable, listening or talking?
I love these questions, Karriem. Maybe we'll
All right.
steal your idea and start doing this at every event.
All right. And so the reason why I asked that question is because one of the things that I found out, and sometimes could be hard for a lot of people, and I like it, listening. Oh, that's awesome. All right. Is that during this time, it is so important to listen. And that could be maybe for listening to a customer, listening to a family member or a friend, because that would tell you where they are and then maybe how you could help them. All right. So if it's a customer, they need some help in this. So maybe you could provide the solution to the problem. Or maybe a family member or friend, you might not be able to provide the solution, but you're giving them some time and now they feel respected. So listening sometimes I think is huge during this time. Thank you all for answering those questions also.
Yeah, piggyback on that. Listening has always been an important part of how to do business well, but it is a gift in the context of a global pandemic where we tend to be worried about ourselves and under a heightened stress load. It's really a gift. And it's something that I guess in my own practice of working with a variety of different patients, private pay and different military and veteran patients, it's often not that I'm suggesting some brilliant solution to the problem that they're having. It's usually not the case. Like with couples. So let's imagine I have a couple and they're just like same argument for the last 10 years at each other's throats, ready to throat punch each other. And it's really just giving them a radical form of acceptance and safety that allows them to downregulate their bodies. And when they downregulate their bodies, they come up with solutions that are brilliant for them, that are uniquely tailored to what they need. So a lot of times the work is not, I need to think of the right solution or say something brilliant. It's in offering people the gift of a radical acceptance and patience and giving them space to just sort of think about and sort out what they're feeling so they can get beyond the first stack of feelings into a different mindset. And that's where solutions come about, I think. So yeah, absolutely. But some of each, depending on the situation. I agree with that too.
Yeah, that's good. I love how we've kind of naturally started moving through these 3 R's, right? We talked about the responding, what is our initial actions at the beginning of this, and when we started talking a little bit about the resetting, how are we adjusting our lives? You know, Andrew, you mentioned this idea of needing to rebalance and retool things so that you can maintain a harmony. Like, we can't act the same way and in this different situation and expect to get the same outcomes in our personal lives, in our finances, in our leadership, in our teams. And so, you know, the name of this event is Future Look, right? Where we want to move from just responding and resetting to actually renewing, where we're looking to the future. And we want to, not on these calls, not just talk about how is the world changing, but also how can we change the world, to put it in kind of a pithy way. And so all of us here as leaders in some regard, whether business owners, whether people that we work in a group with clients, our families, or even just self-leadership, when we're looking to the future, I think, you know, this pandemic is going on probably a lot longer than a lot of us expected. And we still don't have some end date. And so we look to the future and there's a lot of uncertainty, both in the specific context of the economy, which is sort of the overarching theme for today, but also just in general, relationally, in terms of employment, in terms of our social connections, there's a lot of uncertainty. And so my next question then is, looking to the future, how can we lead amidst uncertainty? How can we plan ahead? How can we renew our situation right now and actually take opportunities to forge a path forward when it's not clear what that path ought to be?
I want to pick up on something you said though, Mike, before we lose it, because it was really an important insight there. You said, how is the world changing is a different question to ask yourself than how can we change the world? Okay, so I want to put a poll out. I'm taking Karriem's great idea here. So if you could respond in the chat, imagine two warfighters. You have this scenario. One of them has a bunker that's made by HESCO walls, which is like these protective walls that they fill with sand or sandbags. And so would protect you from falling, you know, rockets and different attacks. With that warrior probably have more trauma bunkered into that HESCO wall while the sounds of incoming bombs and mortars are coming in? Or would they more likely have more trauma if they were out there with a weapon in the open firing back?
So what are the short answers we should answer in the chat?
Yeah, good question. Would you rather do you think more trauma with being bunkered in or proactively fighting the enemy?
So scenario 1 or 2?
Yeah.
Inside or outside?
Inside or outside? I need help with like
inside or outside.
Never use 10 words when 10,000 will do. Yes.
We're getting some mixed responses. That's good.
So because I was unclear, I'm not sure whether people are saying they would rather be outside or the trauma would be worse if you were outside. That was my fault. But the answer is that people are more likely to have trauma if they're bunkered in, because if we can't see something, our anxiety exists in proportion to what we don't know, right? So if you can't see the incoming or feel like you can be an agent in changing your outcome, then you're just sitting there and giving yourself a feeling of sort of learned helplessness. Sitting and waiting in your foxhole for incoming is a terrible idea, versus the slightly greater risk of getting out in the open with some minimal cover and taking it to the enemy. And the impact of that trauma is a different thing. So we can take that principle and apply it in our lives if we're leaders or leading ourselves, as Tino said, to think about, you know, I'm not going to sit in my foxhole and wait for bad news. I'm not going to expose myself to an endless news cycle that promotes learned helplessness. I'm going to come up with a plan of what I can control, and I'm going to move on that plan. And doing that is profoundly beneficial for our mental health, even when we have no more control than we had before we made such a plan, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Shauna, really quickly, are we allowed to jump in if we're not a panelist?
Go for it.
Yeah. On a much more lighthearted note, and in a purely hypothetical world, which I think for me is the big difference here, I was once asked in a speed dating, like I was speed dating, and one of the guys asked me, it's the zombie apocalypse, like what do you do?
Yeah.
And I said that I would like call all the people I loved and then like go take a nap. And he was like angry with me that like that's like how I would handle it, like that I wouldn't go fight. And it's like, it's interesting because I think, you know, in this little chat right now, I said like, actually, no, the bunker sounds good. I'll just go chill. But I actually think it's thinking about it hypothetically versus like the reality of the situation is also very different. Like hypothetically, oh yeah, no, I'll just go hide out for a while. But the insanity that sort of comes with, yeah, not being able to participate in your future is crazy. Yeah.
Great
Yeah,
point.
I think
Gisela?
I think that acts as an incredible metaphor to this idea of the bunker, because a lot of us probably feel almost literally bunkered in right now. You know, where like the message from the very beginning, or at least at the very beginning of the pandemic, was just stay home, just stay home. And so I don't think the argument, Shauna, that you're making is for us to leave our homes all the time. But within this metaphor, right, there is this idea that I would imagine, I'm sure you could speak to this. I would guess there's a psychological effect to being home a lot all the time, with pretty much the same people, pretty much the same relationships.
Groundhog
Day. And with the same cycle. And so that idea of feeling, I think you said trained helplessness was the term, this idea that like, I'm just stuck here without any ability to change my future until this is all done. And as we're realizing until this is all done might be further out than we think, we're left with, I would guess, an increased sense of despair or the opportunity to step out and encourage. And so, I just kicked that back out to all the panelists of like, what are some more ways maybe that can look like, or some more ways that are healthy for us to respond? And it's an open-ended question, but I'd also be specifically curious, Karriem, and like as business leaders for any of us who are, or Andrew, like in terms of financial operation, the difference between being like bold and reckless and foolish.
Yeah, so I think on that note, right, and I wrote down these numbers, right, so I'd get it right. But from the time 2001, right, in the terrorist attack, it was 33 months before the market hit its bottom, right? That's 33 months to process what happened in that event before the market reached its bottom and you could reshape and develop a new game plan. And what's also interesting is in 2007, right, it was a 17-month lag between when the housing crisis started to impact or crumble to where the market hit its bottom. And I think what's so different about this time financially or investment-wise for me and the clients or just the general population, right, the world's population, is that people had to deal with a collapsing market in the matter of days, right? Days to weeks. I mean, the market moved hundreds of thousands of points, right? Inside of a 14-day cycle. And I think that's so interesting because you have to adapt to what Shauna said, right? You have to adapt so quickly. You have to be proactive. You have to be, again, assessing constantly what it is that you can be out there doing, because as it turns around, this time it's been so quick, you're left behind if you weren't, you know, not necessarily left behind, but you're potentially lagging if you weren't as quick and as proactive as others.
I just saw my buddy John Bates jump on. Hi, John. I just want to say hi. He's like one of my favorite people, and everybody here loves you too. Yeah, I mean, we can absolutely, back to your point, Mike, we can put ourselves in solitary confinement. You know, even if we have loved ones around us, you know, the psychology of that is feeling trapped in our homes and like we can't go out. Now, psychologically, what that does is it trains our minds to be more fearful of what's outside. We can fear the air we breathe if we do that long enough. So while I don't, you know, encourage everybody here to go out and hang out in a crowded group of people with no masks on or anything, there's nothing to prevent us from going on a walk in the woods far away from people. There's actually a kind of a no jerks rule that I think is helpful here, that it's a proven fact, just I'm saying it is. 5 miles out on any hiking trail, there's no more jerks. Because I've never gone 5 miles out on any hiking trail and found somebody willing to work that hard and they're like really mean. So it can be good for our mental health to get out and really get a change of scenery. It's good for our brains to get a novel change of scenery and not feel like we have to stay in one particular location all the time. What do you think, Karriem?
So leadership is all about self-care. I'm going to say that again. Leadership is all about self-care. And the reason why I say that is we are been so prone to look at the outside and helping other people. But if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't be a benefit to anybody else. And so I say that because my wife had to pull my coattails because I was stacking up many meetings on one day and doing a lot of stuff on one day to a point where I was super tired. And she says, you got to chill. You got to take a break, man. And so if we're not taking care of ourselves, then how can we take care of other people? And so I say, when you're leading yourself, then you can lead others. All right. And so think of the ways that you can actually take some time, take a break, and get yourself together so then you can serve other people. And so sometimes that might be a hard thing. I have two daughters, 4 and 2. We also had their sister for 6 months. That was we got her when she was 5 years old, and she just went back to her mother a couple weeks ago. So having 3 young kids in a home was no joke, and you had to navigate that, working and taking care of your family, but also how do you take care of yourself so that you can take care of your other family and just not yourself. So I would say self-care is huge, and I wouldn't feel bad if you just have to tell people, I just need to stop and pause right now. And then maybe I'll re-engage with you a little bit later.
I think it's also important to do some proactive things to try and take care of the people that we do have in our immediate circle, whether it's a neighbor who can't get out to the supermarket, or like I had a spectacularly failed attempt to give my kids a good summer that wasn't like a total bummer. I bought one of these like 15-foot like vinyl pools, and I figured out pretty quickly that I do not have the skills to like balance pool chemicals. And so we started like creating a cesspool in the backyard. And so I put this thing out on Facebook, and now all my neighbors are like, save the clock tower. And so they're coming in with chemicals and dumping it in the pool and trying to rectify that situation. But I think doing things, whether we're successful or not, even the fact that I tried, that was not lost on my kids. That like, I was trying to make sure that their summer didn't suck. And so again, thinking beyond ourselves about who we have in our immediate circle that we can be a blessing to in whatever practical ways is part of not only like self-care, but our self-moral care, sort of feeds our soul, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask one more question, then I want to actually open it up to like an open Q&A for everyone. And I want to phrase this maybe like, we mentioned this, the personal effects of the COVID economy. But then there is that economy piece. So I want to ask this almost like in a 50% generic way, but a 50% specifically economic way. What are the ways that you, the panelists, are renewing, leading your teams, forging ahead for the future?
Say it again, Mike.
Both in context in general with COVID and specifically the economic context. How are you leading, renewing, and forging ahead for the future?
All right, that's a good question. One of the things, and Tino went through this program. It's called the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program, and one of the things they talk about is opportunities and how to think about and assess opportunities for your business. And it's so crucial now to be able to pivot. And some people's pivot might be pivot out of their business because right now it's not sustainable. And so I had a conversation with someone last month that closed their business this month because they would have been dumping too much money into the business. So they're going to regroup for next year. Right. And so every single day there has to be an assessment done, because the economy is changing so rapidly that you have to actually almost project 3 scenarios. Yes, the economy is going to do well. B, it might do well. And then C is going to falter. So what do I do with my my business? What do I do? Well, how I bring in revenue for myself and for my family. And so I would tell people, start thinking about scenarios, right? If my industry does collapse or my industry does a change or it goes up high, what am I going to do with an opportunity? Or maybe there might not be an opportunity right now. So I would say start running scenarios right now that you might can project what's going to happen in the future. Or if something happens, you say, all right, I thought about that, so this is what we're going to do to help out your team to get through maybe another shutdown, right? It's very practical that we might get another shutdown, depending where you are, in what city, what state. So have those scenarios already planned out, and I think it will help your team.
Yeah, it's good. How about you, Andrew and Shauna? How are you leading and forging ahead for the future?
I can talk, but Andrew, do you want to go?
No, it's Shauna. I can go after you. That's fine.
Well, this is a time when, people across society are experiencing traumas that they've just never experienced at this level before. And the work I do as the Stella Center Chief Psychologist is to advance innovation in trauma care. So in my case, this crisis is never something I would have wished on any of us. It is at the same time, I hope, a bit like how diamonds are shaped, that there's incredible pressures that can come together and create an opportunity for a paradigm shift. I did an article the other day for The Hill about how innovation in trauma care is going to require a different level of collaboration, for people to just stop talking in rhetorical ways about offering medical care as a team sport and actually doing it. And how I've been collaborating with docs in the special forces community and the doctor I work with, Dr. Lipov at the Stella Center, to co-treat patients using a combination of biological and psychological interventions. We're seeing that when we get people calm, then we give them therapy, they're able to maintain the gains that they make and get really different outcomes. So my team is hiring. I'm grateful that I have an investor that's brave. And yeah, we're taking a hit right now because the service we offer, we can't offer to people in anywhere near the numbers we could before because of travel restrictions. So many of our patients were flying in from outside Chicago. So now we're looking at how do we put clinics in different areas of the country. And we just see this as a moral imperative to provide this kind of innovative care. So I'm leading that by engaging everybody on my team in the understanding of what the right care looks like for trauma survivors, how we can do that from a trauma-informed approach, how we can build and maintain trust with veterans, even if we're civilians doing that, and how I can educate referring providers into taking care of their patients at the highest possible standard. So it's been a time for me to really dig in and do some work that I think we need to.
So on my side, I think remaining front and center, visible, present, all of those matter at this point more than ever. And then putting sometimes pleasantries or pleasant conversations aside and kind of digging in a little bit deeper, getting to ask the harder questions. How are you? What is your outlook? Trying to connect on a human level has been imperative for me, my team, during all of this. And again, to piggyback on Karriem, to run through different scenarios, to play that devil's advocate, say, let's shape 3 different scenarios. How are we going to recover, or how are we going to spring back? Again, from my individual clients to my businesses, exactly what Karriem is saying. We have to devise plans to figure out what our next or future steps look like. From there, Mike, help me with the question one more time. I had other talking points.
Yeah, that's fine. And if you have, and if any of you panelists have other things that you want to just bring up because you think they're valuable, please do so. But the question was, along the line with the title of the event of Future Look, right? Like as we move from responding and resetting to actually renewing, taking advantage of the opportunity, choosing to forge ahead. How are you leading? How in your sphere of influence? How are you forging ahead?
So that was the point I wanted to bring up. I met this wonderful individual that was actually worked here in New York Presbyterian. He was a trauma surgeon for over 30 years. And he had spent a lot of time coming up with this context or framing around the words comparative coping, right? Trying to put yourself in the other person's position and understand what they are going through, right? To become more relatable. And I realized that through working with my clients, it was okay to say, like, listen, today's tough, right? Level set right from the beginning, saying, we can figure this out. Life, again, sometimes takes different turns, right? Financially as well as personally. And having, from my standpoint, those kind of early conversations with the clients throughout the past 3 months has allowed them to develop or grow our relationship, and has allowed me to have a better sense of where they're going. So everyone has won from this type of larger human connection, I think.
For me as well, thanks to John Bates' mentoring and support of me, I was able to get picked up by a speakers rep, and we're creating a series of speaking opportunities for corporations. And so we looked at, what is the opportunity here? I'm a psychologist. I'm not somebody who has been to business school, and really said, how can I be a psychologist and share my expertise in the business space? And what I said is, trauma changes personality. It changes how we make decisions. It changes the basis on which we make decisions. And just like it changes us as people, it changes a corporate body. A corporation's personality can change when they go through a traumatic disruption. So you think about a company as a person, what kind of person would it be? Would it be, the playground bully that, beats everybody down and can't develop trusting relationships with any of their partners? Would it be somebody who is careful to a fault, who is so conservative, like Andrew was saying, that they just sit and wait in the foxhole and they don't take action? So they lose opportunities to partner and advance things when there's opportunities to do that. Or would it be somebody who holds their center in the middle of a trauma, who manages their own stress by turning to the other people around them that they love and trust, and doing that well, being vulnerable as appropriate, but also having a plan and making decisions about how to be proactive? And so I'm developing kind of this series of talks or presentations to really unpack some of those concepts, something I never would have thought to do if it wasn't for the massive disruption that corporations, leaders, and individuals have had because of COVID-19.
Yeah, I think a trend that I'm hearing is this idea of like seizing the opportunity as opposed to being passive, right? Like the difference between leading forward and just receiving what's happening to us is, are we willing to step up and do that? I want to turn in one moment to a Q&A and open it up. But first, I just wanted to, again, thank all the panelists for coming on here today. I think Tino is actually going to be posting some of the stuff in the chat about some of the things these panelists have going on, and resources and whatnot, in case any of you want to check any of their stuff out. Before we switch to the Q&A, I just want to ask you three if you have any other specific thoughts or insights or any other stuff that you would just want to share with us in this space about the topic, or just generally.
I just noticed something in the chat that Gisela, how do you pronounce it?
It's Gisela, but it's
Gisela.
Really hard. So don't worry.
No, names are important. Gisela, your illustration of the zombie apocalypse was really interesting. I'm going to think on that one a little bit more. But one of the things in the chat that I don't want us to miss is it does depend on the time that we expect to suffer, right? So, if the Titanic is about to go down, do you take a sleeping pill and if you're not going to be able to get off on the boat, what do we do, when the end is near, versus something that's an enduring fight and an invisible enemy that's coming at us? That might be a different thing. And some of you were talking about that, and I just love to see that kind of critical thinking and reflection on, it depends on the situation and what we would do. So everything is rational in some situation. And so I just appreciate that.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Tino and Mike and Shauna, Andrew, and bring on the questions.
Andrew, do you have anything to add before we jump in?
No, I think just stay engaged, stay informed, right? Have varying sources of information and try to derive true facts in this environment where everything keeps changing.
Awesome. Yeah, so let's dive in. I mean, we have 3 experts here on psychology and business and finance and leadership, and I'm sure that's the most reductive way to describe you all. So let's take advantage, and any questions that we have, you can just pop up and ask them, or you can type them in the chat, and we'll just take it from there.
I mean, Andrew, to your point, all those relevant points, some great conversation. Thank you from all of you. How do you find that balance to not find yourself being over-informed? What's that right balance for you?
That's a great question. It's on such a personal level. For me, I haven't hit that point. I apologize, I don't know how to better answer that. But I've been reading, I've been watching, I've been listening so much. I think that point earlier on listening, it's incredibly critical at this point in time. That's the best I can answer it. I think more in this case is unfortunately best. And I say that only because things are changing ever so quickly. From one day to another, something has changed, right? Facts have changed pertaining, whether it's science, COVID, financials, politics, everything's moving so quickly.
Thank you. And to that point, I mean, I guess the rest of the panelists, how are you navigating in the potential overload of information?
I guess I would say when my brain gets tired, that means it's time to turn the information off.
There's good pain and there's bad pain.
Yeah.
And knowing the difference is half the battle, I think. The pain of fear that cripples us and makes us more likely to feel helpless and overrun by our anxiety is not helpful. But there's also being informed, like Andrew is saying. Andrew probably has a higher ability to take in information on detailed developments about financial developments because you have the scaffolding for understanding that. For someone like me, I would probably go to somebody like you and say, translate this for me. And so I think another concept is, where do you need to deep dive based on what your expertise is? And where can you resource your friends to be force multipliers to help you understand things that might not be your best asset?
That's really well said, Shauna.
It's good. I think one other thing I'll add too is, so my background is in mass media communication. So I'm nowhere near the expert level of anyone on this panel, but this is something that is relevant to me. And I think part of it is the kind of content that you are reading, the kind of things you're engaging with. And it's very easy to just infinitely scroll and just keep inputting content. And I think Andrew is right in that things are changing so fast and there's so much that is important to keep up on, but there's also a lot out there that is not important to keep up on. Yeah. And so I think, choosing the way we engage and what we engage and from what set of sources we engage is also important. So we're not just overloading with things that aren't actually relevant, but that we are directing our attentions toward the things that are important to know, again, with whatever topic that is, whether that is politics, whether it's economics, whether it's the science around COVID right now, to not just treat all information and all sources equally, but to be intentional about the way we engage.
I like that, being intentional. Go ahead, Dana, that was awesome.
No, I was just going to say, Mike, I want to build on that in terms of, being intentional about how you engage. I mean, look at this group that we've cobbled together over the various months. I mean, I feel like you guys are warm, wonderful friends, and we've had intentional conversation every time we speak. I had my book club over Friday night, and there were not a lot of intentional conversation, but it was just like a stark contrast in terms of, like, where are you spending your time? Are you reaching out to people that are, isolated right now? That was a great help, Shauna. Thank you. And I thought about a couple of people that I should reach out to. So I think it's engaging in conversations like this that help us be better humans, better leaders, and grow as we evolve through this.
Dana, that actually kind of inspires a question in me. Like, I think there are some situations, so I'm not in a book club, but like there are some situations I'm like Zooming with friends or something where like if we're unintentional, it's kind of great. Like it's kind of fine. But there's plenty of other times, and this is at work for sure, but also like in trying to organize a fresh direct or a grocery delivery, right? Where like intentional and maybe even focused like engagement feels so important. And I guess I would love to hear from the panelists. Like I sometimes find myself struggling between like, or wavering between like patience and kindness, and like sometimes people need to vent or sometimes people just can't focus and that just is what it is, versus like, well, actually we need to exchange information right now, and actually we need to make a decision right now, and actually we need to kind of like get there. And I know that's like an impossible thing to answer, but do you guys have any advice on that front, on how to maybe try to do both at once?
No, that was good, because what I'm finding now is that a lot of people, because they're on virtual meetings now, they feel they don't have to be intentional about the topic.
Yeah.
And then they take more time to meet. And what happens is that now people get more anxiety because you're having a meet instead of for an hour, now 2 hours, where if we had a team meeting, it'll be an hour, now it's 2. Like, why did it get out of hand? Because people are not being focused. And so I like to refocus people, even though I'm not a dominant leader, but I try to get people focused, because as you know, people, what is it, Zoom? I think you were saying, Mike, Zoom, people are zoomed out or something, or virtual meeting out fatigue, right? And so we do have to be intentional and be very clear and succinct about what we're trying to get out of a conversation. Unless you're just having, let's get together on Zoom, but we don't care what we're doing. You know, that's a different story.
So
yeah, on the note, oh, go ahead, Tina.
So I have a question. So this is purely hypothetical. So I'm not talking about me. Yeah, I'm just gonna start there. You know, the Shauna is probably kind of like, this is definitely just don't psychoanalyze me. That's basically what I'm gonna say. I think it was Karriem that you were talking about. You know, the importance of listening, and even just kind of making a list of people to. Oh no, did I offend Shauna? She just left. I might have to let her back in. So Karriem, you're saying earlier, kind of where how important it is to listen, to kind of reach out, to make a list of people, to reach out to them. So now we're 4 months in. What if we haven't done that until now? Is that something that is important to do? And if so, how should we go about doing it?
I would say yes. What'd you say, Mike?
Asking for a friend.
Yes, yeah. I would say yes. Even if you didn't reach out to them before, you still should reach out to them. If they're on your mind, why not? You know, send them a text, give them a call, right? Yeah. You never know what somebody's are thinking unless you reach out to them.
I lost the connection. I think I'm back now.
You're back, Shauna.
Okay.
Yep. I thought I offended you, so.
Yeah, we have like lost all of those incidental, like serendipitous social interactions with each other. Like you go to the Starbucks, like, gosh, I want to go to a Starbucks right now, you know, and like walk into a Starbucks and order a coffee and like run into my neighbors. Like I always see a neighbor at the Starbucks, and like I haven't seen them, you know, in 5 months or 4 months since we've been sheltered in place. And so I think people are starving right now for what they've lost. And so some of the reason why Zoom meetings can end up being 2 hours, I know I've had the experience of people just want to talk and talk and talk because they have this like pent up need to connect. And if you go out for a walk, it's a little weird. Like when people have, there's research, when people have a mask on, you can't tell if somebody's smiling at you or really pissed, because all you see is like their eyes are wrinkled, right? And so you can be perceiving fear and anger where it doesn't exist because you can't see their whole face. And so we're suffering these invisible effects of this social distancing. I wish people had put more thought into that term. Why did we come out of the gate with social distancing? As opposed to, that tells you to stay back, socially distance, as opposed to your point, Tino and Karriem, connect from a distance. What we ought to be doing is connecting from a distance.
Yeah.
It tells you where to go and why it's important to proactively continue to connect with people, whether we've talked to them in 4 months or not.
I totally agree. Physically distant, right, but socially connected.
Yeah.
It's everything.
Takes more work right now. We have to be intentional or it's not going to happen.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think, come to the point of these series of events to basically help ask better questions. And I love how you just reframe social distancing to connect to the distance. I think that's perfect.
Could I challenge the group? A little experiment here. I want to challenge all of you today to write down the names of 3 people you haven't talked to since the pandemic started. Maybe you haven't talked to them in a few years. And give each one a call. Have a conversation about how it's going for them and catch up. Really give yourself some time and see how your mood shifts when you get off that phone call. Perceive the shift in what it feels like to reconnect to somebody you have trust with that you haven't talked to in a long time.
Tino, I just want to say thanks for asking that, because I had 3 family members that I haven't talked to in maybe a year in New York that had COVID-19. They're doing better. And I was afraid to even reach out to them because I haven't even checked up on them when they were doing well. So I say, you know what? I just need to follow up. And they said, thank you very much for checking on me. And I'm doing better. And so thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, similarly, I just reconnected with an estranged family member because a friend of theirs had a family member who passed away, and they were like, I need to reconnect with my family because I might not have another chance. So yeah, now is better than never.
If I could put a little, there's something that I think kind of fits here, and it certainly fits with a good beginning opening. I think if you're going to reach out to someone like that, one of the things that's been really hitting me over the past couple of weeks is that and I think I'm not the only one, had June as the horizon. Like make it till June when this whole thing started. Get a PPP loan, apply for the EIDL, whatever. Make it till June. Okay, it is almost August. And so that to me really speaks to the middle one, Mike, of respond, reset, renew. I feel like it's just dawning on everybody. In fact, I just had a client call this morning where this was a big topic, that okay, this is clearly going on longer than like mentally I was planning for, even if there wasn't any thought behind that mental planning. And so I think that, that's a really interesting thing to think about just in general. But the way that could play in is, hey, you know what? I didn't call you in the midst of all the madness. And I think I somehow thought June we were going to be fine. And now it's the end of July. And I'm sorry I didn't call you earlier, but I wanted to call you now. How are you? Because I don't think there's a horizon. Like it's utterly indefinite,
That's really helpful. The specific, we talked a little bit earlier about hitting the wall, when it goes from a sprint to a different type of muscle that's needed for the long term. And, just even like people can read intentions through the phone. And so if you haven't talked to someone in a while, just calling them and saying, I miss your face. How are you? Or I've been thinking about you lately. Wanted to reach out. Could we connect? Like I've never had somebody go, where were you before? They're just grateful that you did call. So don't get hung up or paralyzed in terms of like that guilt that we all feel about like, got to dig out of this hole. The hole is in your mind. When you have the right tone and approach, people are just glad to connect and they just need it right now.
Yeah.
Well,
There's so much. Oh, go ahead, Larry.
I think many people are glad to connect. I found this discussion very stimulating, and I thank the panelists, and I also thank the others on the Zoom for your comments. And I'm going to have to go shortly, but I do want to point this out. We are talking about leadership in the context of, say, COVID-19. But it becomes more complex if we think that it's not just COVID-19 that's going on. It's COVID-19, and then it's the whole issue around Black lives and injustice and whatnot. And so, Shauna, I can kind of direct this to you. When we talk about trauma,
Yeah,
I mean, trauma builds on itself.
that's right.
Trauma can also be experienced vicariously.
Yeah.
I think of ancestors that I've had, for example, that suffered because they were Black.
Yeah.
And that has been passed on to me through oral histories and oral tradition and whatnot. So what goes on in the streets now triggers some of that past trauma, you see. So it makes it that much more intense, that much more complicated. And so when we want to try to reach out to each other, and whites particularly, who I love, who love me back, you know, want to show that they're concerned, they don't know what to do and they don't know what to say. And so they call and say, how are you? And if I'm feeling overwhelmed by the trauma, by the news, by all of this stuff that's going on, still trying to run a business, still trying to lead groups of people, still trying to teach and do all these other kinds of things, it gets to a point where that recipient may not want to talk about it, may not want to talk about it at all. And so I guess my question to the panelists and to the group would be, how, as we think about leadership and emotional intelligence and all of that, we also have to think about who we're leading and where they're at. And there's no, and clearly one size does not fit all in terms of how we respond. So Shauna, just see if you can shed some light on that people are very individualistic. Some are extremely overwhelmed. Some suffer from the trauma of their predecessors, their ancestors and whatnot, adding to their own.
Yep.
They don't know what to do themselves.
Yeah.
How can you help?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Thank you for making that point, Larry, that for some people in society right now, there's multiple layers of trauma. One of the things that really was moving and hard was when a warrior that I've known for years reached out to me and said, you know, I was doing okay until George Floyd was killed. And now just everything that's happening, it's just too much. I'm too exhausted. And so I think one of the things about the trauma, the race-based trauma that we're talking about right now, is that it's one of those kinds of traumas that's like 1,000 little cuts that people don't see if they haven't been on the receiving end of it. And now it's come out of the shadows and people are experiencing it and they're in that process of trying to make sense of it. And you're right. If you ask a patient, it's like there has to be some level of emotional intelligence about how are you and expecting a response when someone might be still processing it or maybe doesn't want to talk about it right now because it's too raw. And reaching out and saying, I'm here for you. I just want you to know I'm thinking of you, and no urgency, but I'm here for you and I've got your back. And if you ever want to talk or if there's any way that I can support you, then please let me know. But I don't think that's enough. I think people sometimes call and they say, I'm here for you, call me if you need me, and people will never take that offer either. So I favor sort of acting in line with our values no matter what. So maybe it's quietly moving in ways that are supportive, not always like grandstanding and doing, you know, these public proclamations to show where we stand on things, but privately moving to support those that we care about and doing things privately that are aligned with those values. To answer your question though, absolutely, people are affected by multiple layers of trauma. Absolutely, I should shift my answer to not just say everybody's going to be happy to hear from you, because you're right, that's not true. I think people are happy to know that you care about them, but to do it in a way that doesn't put the pressure on them to disclose experiences they may not want to talk about right now or with you or whatever. And that is part of offering that radical acceptance. That's part of how I've built the trust with warriors, is I'm there for them, and I'm just like willing to wait if that's what it takes, or if I'm not the right person to walk with them through that valley, then that's okay too. So that's what I would say, but I'd love to hear from the other panelists or anybody else on that really good question.
Before the panelists jump in, let me say one more thing. The fact of the matter is that when you talk about preparing yourself quietly, what can you do quietly? Whether we're black, white, or whatever color we may be, whatever gender we may be, we need to try to continue to educate ourselves. Just try to educate ourselves as to what it feels like to walk in somebody else's shoes.
Mm-hmm.
So for blacks, for example, to have a white person reach out to me,
Mm-hmm.
who authentically loves me and who I love back, right? Nothing will mean more to me than if that person can identify with this, or at least understand the shoes that I'm walking in.
Mm-hmm.
And you can educate yourselves that way privately. There's lots of stuff being written now, volumes and volumes and volumes. I mean, that in itself is overwhelming, with all the specialists and whatnot. But Black people are looking for allies right now.
Yeah.
Just to talk specifically about Blacks for a moment, Blacks are looking for allies.
Mm-hmm.
People who can espouse their view so that they don't have to do it by themselves.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
So that's how you can help. That's how you can add to those are dimensions you can add to your leadership style that will make a difference to those who you're leading. Just remember, one size does not fit all in terms of who you're trying to govern and who you're trying to encourage.
And if I could, I would add to that people have a very finely attuned radar for when you're speaking out as an ally because it comes from deep in your heart, from a place of real love and concern, and the leaders that speak out because they're doing it to protect their business or their image. People can pick up on that in a nanosecond. And so both have to go together. You have to go through that personal process, I think, of looking at yourself and doing that personal work to get to a place of not perfect understanding, but more understanding than you had, and doing it from the base of the values that you hold sacred.
Corporations are guilty of that. I don't want to generalize, but now I'll generalize.
Yeah.
Corporations can be guilty of that. They can say, "Oh yes, we believe in diversity and inclusion."
Yeah.
And that's what my business does. Is it develops strategic plans to enhance that. But I can tell what corporate leaders are serious about it and authentic about it, and those are the ones I'll work with. I won't work with everybody. See? So you're so right, Shauna, that authenticity is absolutely critical, and especially at times like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, goes back to my word in the beginning, being empathetic, and I think you said it so much, Larry, about people need to meet people where they are. And I had two friends that are people of color, and they said, "Karriem, you're the only person I could call because I knew you would respect how I viewed certain things in life." And so they felt that the cop was justified for what he did to George Floyd, but they said, "I don't think I can even express that to other people but you, because you will respect me, but we can have a conversation." And so what I shared with them is that I want to respect people and see where they are. And then how about let's talk about where we can meet and say what was wrong and what was right. But guess what? They're not having that conversation with anybody else but myself because they feel some type of way. So I had to meet them where they are. And so I think that's what we have to do, no matter what side or middle people are on, is we could meet them where they are and have a respectful conversation. And then there has to be something we could agree upon.
You know, I just want to say thank you for saying that, and thank all of you for this conversation. This kind of a conversation is a big reason why we created this space, because I feel like out there in the, you know, in the wild right now, people are self-censoring like there's no tomorrow, and there's absolutely no place that people can talk about things and feel like they will be listened for versus just listened to then be derided. And so we really want to create this as a space to have honest, open, real conversations. And this is why we're doing this. So thank you, everybody.
You're welcome.
Well said. Well said.
And Lara, I think, again, I agree with everyone. Thank you so much for bringing up that whole element that we had not even mentioned until now. And I think it ties back to the idea that this moment, this season that we're in is so complex and layered. And we touched on all sorts of different things. You know, we started with the economy, but what's happening in the economy is inextricable from our social life, from our mental health, from our relationships. It's all entangled. It's all connected. We're whole beings. And so all of that to kind of, I think I heard the word overwhelming more times than any other word in the past hour and a half. It's just, there's just so much and so many different angles that all this is happening in. And so we're going to wrap here in just a minute. I'm going to turn it over to Tino to kind of close us out with a little bit of detailed information. Again, yeah, make sure to check out all of the panelists' stuff if anything resonated with you. Some of the key things I heard here, just to summarize a little, was I heard the themes of like courage and looking forward, acting, not just letting life happen to you, of having both self-care and empathy as absolutely critical parts of our leadership. And to humbly be okay with the fact that none of us had the last few months figured it out, and that we're still just moving forward, guessing as best we can with the wisdom we have and the help of others. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panelists. You know, warm shaking hands of applause to you all for everything that you've brought today, and thank you for everyone who came on the call, who donated to support the organization that Shauna talked about. And we're really looking forward to the next time. So just thank you for everyone for making this what it is. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Everybody smile. Let's do a group picture.
Oh, Lord.
Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, so yeah, once again, just want to thank you everybody kind of for coming. And I know that kind of for all of us, Zoom fatigue is a real thing. And so thank you so much for choosing to spend the last hour and a half being engaged in this conversation. And I hope that you got as much as I did out of these conversations. And like I mentioned, a small part of me is a little bit selfish, kind of in terms of kind of making this so that creating a space so that I can learn from one another. But I'm so glad that I'm able to share this with everybody. And I also want to thank you, kind of John Bates, kind of Mike, Dana, and Grant, kind of for joining us on this journey. So we do have 2 more events that I want to just quickly share on the screen. I'm being my own tech person, so that's why I'm looking away. So this is what we have for next month. So every month we have a theme. This month was about the economy. And if you have missed the our kind of sessions, we'll be sending out the link with all the with all the videos available so that you can go back and watch them. So these are the next 2. So next month is all about education, and for the next one we're going to talk mostly about the kind of primary to secondary education and kind of how that world has completely changed. I know that Shauna, you kind of talks about kind of just how it completely flipped your life kind of around. And I know that that's the same thing with a lot of administrators and also teachers. So we're going to kind of dive into that. And then kind of for the following session, it's going to be about higher ed. You know, that's something that a lot of us are probably aware and have conversations around kind of it being broken already, and and COVID has just completely exposed the Achilles heel of higher ed, and really begged the question of like, is this actually worth it? Is this kind of where we want kind of education to take us? So with that said, once again, thank you so much for coming. I hope to see you guys in the next session.
Tina, are those education events going to focus on any specific region, or is it really general?
It is.
I know that the education landscape is so different in different parts of the country.
Yeah, so once again, our goal is just to help leaders ask better questions, very much like what we're doing today, like kind of reframing, challenging one another. And even with our panelists kind of today, like we're all from kind of all different parts of the country. So we're going to take that kind of broader approach, and once again, you know, you're able to kind of ask specific questions, and also invite people you know that would benefit from the session as well. All right. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Jump off.